Major crypto bills passed in Washington, D.C. today. Let's talk about what they are, what they do, and what, if any, impact they have on Bitcoin. Okay, so three bills passed in Washington, D.C. today. One of them, I believe, or maybe two, go back to the U.S. Senate, but they will pass there. The other goes straight to the president's desk for signature. And those three bills are, first, a stablecoin bill called the Genius Act. Stable bills are digital representations of the U.S. dollar, which are primarily valuable to people outside of the United States. For people inside the United States, there's really no reason to use a stablecoin because it's pegged to the value of the U.S. dollar, and people inside the United States already have access to the U.S. dollar with the existing banking system, at least most of them do. So the Genius Act puts rules of the road around stablecoins and will result in the U.S. dollar being much more widely available and widely used outside of the United States, which is actually good because a lot of people live in countries where their currency totally sucks and is losing its purchasing power and being inflated away by 50 to 100% per year. So the value of their purchasing power is dropping by half, like literally every 12 months. So obviously the US dollar drops in value by somewhere between 4% and 9% per year, but that's a lot better than 50% or 100% per year. So the more people that are using the US dollar instead of some completely defunct local currency is actually good for those people. It's also good for Bitcoin because if you are using a stable coin, the two biggest ones are USDT. The T stands for Tether. The USD stands for US dollar. So USDT is US dollar tether because it is tethered to the US dollar. The other, and it's the company behind it is called Tether. The other big one is Circle, USDC. The C stands for Circle. The C also stands for coin, USD coin. So USDC and USDT are the two big ones, and they represent hundreds of billions of dollars today. But with the passage of the Genius Act, they could represent trillions of dollars of US dollars. And the reason the US government cares about that is because they want their currency spread around the world, and because all of these companies, the way they mint these stable coins is by buying US treasuries, which is government debt. So basically it's a way to create a new buyer of US government debt in a world where increasingly people do not want to own US government debt because the government does not look like a good credit risk at $37 trillion in debt. So that's the stablecoin bill. It doesn't directly affect Bitcoin other than, obviously, it's way easier to buy Bitcoin if you already have a cryptocurrency that you're transacting with. So it is much easier to go from USDC or USDT to Bitcoin as compared to, the Zimbabwe, whatever currency, or the, Thai baht, or the Honduran lempira, or a peso, or something like that. So it's good for Bitcoin in that it makes it a lot easier to get. You're basically halfway there. If you have USDC or USDT, you're basically one click away from turning that into Bitcoin. As opposed to if you have other currencies, it's, a lot more hurdles you got to jump through to end up with Bitcoin. So it's good for Bitcoin that way, but it's not directly applicable. But that is the Genius Act that got signed or voted on by the House of Representatives in Washington today. And I believe that one goes straight to the president's desk. I forget which is which. But anyway, the Clarity Act is a rules of the road for all cryptocurrencies. It doesn't directly affect Bitcoin because Bitcoin is a commodity, not a security. So Bitcoin has already had clear rules of the road for a long time. So it does not need the Clarity Act to clarify that. But there's certainly a benefit to having cryptocurrency in general, the rules of the road more clear, because a lot of major institutions in the United States are still scared of digital assets and scared of cryptocurrencies because they feel like there's not legislative and regulatory clarity around those things. Even though there is for Bitcoin, because there isn't for so many other things in the world of crypto, they lump them all in together as sort of a big scary pile, and they don't want to touch them. So the Clarity Act clarifies that, which is it clarifies what is a security, what is a commodity, what is a stable coin, what is a digital asset. Basically, it lays out all the different sort of digital things you might be able to own, what the rules are around each of them, and who the regulator is, whether it's the Security and Exchange Commission, the SEC, or whether it's the CFTC, the Commodities Trading Futures, see Commodities Futures Trading Commission, CFTC. Anyway, but it makes all of that clear. All right, the third piece of legislation is the anti-CBDC legislation. So what is the CBDC? A CBDC is a central bank digital currency. If you think, wait a second, central bank digital currency, how is that different from a stable coin, which sounds like it's also a digital currency? How is it different? Well, the big difference is one of them is controlled by a private company and the other is controlled by a central government. So in the case of Tether and Circle, they have to back it by US dollars and they are private companies. Now, that does not mean private companies cannot exhibit bad behavior, but private companies are much more likely to exhibit good behavior as compared to governments, which are constantly, in general, behaving badly. So the anti-CBDC bill says the U.S. government will never issue a central bank digital currency, meaning it will never be in the market competing with Tether and with Circle and with others. If there's, a major bank issues a stable coin, they could do that. The U.S. government has committed with the anti-CBDC legislation that they will never introduce their own central bank digital currency, which is great. Again, it doesn't directly affect Bitcoin, although it does mean Bitcoin will not have to compete with a central bank digital currency at some point in the future because there won't be one. Central bank digital currencies are actually pretty terrifying because if the government has digital control over the money, for example, the European Central Bank and the Bank of International Settlements, which is the central bank of central banks. So each geography has their own central bank. The European Central Bank, which is, we call ours the Federal Reserve. The ECB is the European Central Bank, and, Chinese, the government has its own central bank and all that. Well, there's a central bank of central banks called the Bank of International Settlements, the BIS. Anyway, so actually, I'm going to do a separate video with more details on this, and I will break it into two parts. Thanks.